Hey everyone. So as technology progresses on, people want to do less stuff, and by less stuff I mean touch buttons, because nobody wants to do manual labor anyways. So when you go to the store, the doors will open automatically for you. When you put your hand underneath the soap dispenser, the soap dispenses automatically. People are also using AIs to do a bunch of stuff, but everybody's doing videos on AI nowadays, so it's getting bland and uninteresting. Plus we're working in Minecraft, so I'll do whatever I can get my hands on. And today we're going to be talking about automatic doors, more specifically, automatic player detectors. Now of course we could just use the thing that people have been using since the beginning of time, and that's using pressure plates and stuff, or now as somewhat recently you can use sculk sensors, but that doesn't shake the fact that I kind of have a divine hatred for them as a redstone component, and only use them in certain specific, more violent circumstances. The reason I actually hate sculk sensors is because I feel like they're way too unreliable for me to use, and they get triggered by literally everything, making them kind of annoying to work with all the wool you need, and I just don't like them. So today we're going to be working on what I like to call optical switches, which are switches that function based on establishing line of sight with a certain target, and this will actually open the door. And this is far more synonymous to real life, I guess, automatic doors, so that's much better. Most of the things that we're going to be talking about in this video are sort of automatic door applications, so generally we're going to be looking at sort of this kind of range of detection, but some of the sensors we're going to be looking at are going to have significantly longer reaches that could have wildly different applications. So let's begin. Okay, right here is my very first optical switch. It utilizes 2 creepers, some funky mechanics, and 3 chest minecarts. And other than the fact that it boasts a slightly slower reaction time than some of the other switches I've developed, it actually works great. But the reason why I'm mentioning it is because it sets the stone for basically all the other switches that we're designing in this row, because it exploits a very key mechanic about how mobs work, and we're going to be using that to detect players. But before we talk about that design over there, let's talk about how we got there. You see, when it comes to using mobs to detect players, I think the most obvious behavioral change in a mob when a player is present nearby is their decision to walk towards the player. And of course it makes sense that we can use this fundamental mechanic of all hostile, I guess, melee mobs, that they walk towards the player to detect them, but the problem with this is that it's not like they just stand still waiting for a player to show up. The fact is that they actually wander around, and if we speed up the game, they actually do this a whole ton. So, how do we isolate the behavior of a creeper such that it only performs a certain behavior when it sees a player, but not out of just wandering around randomly? A possible choice is aggressive behavior, which we're actually going to be looking into, but for our situation with the use of creepers or possibly zombies, this doesn't really make sense. Zombies can only attack with melees, and that's kind of really terrible to detect, really useless, and creepers are single-use explosions, which are also very difficult to control. It's here that the skeleton might actually prove to be a little bit more useful than we thought, as it displays aggressive behavior at a distance, but it's not really going to be too helpful because it's pretty difficult to absorb the arrows in a way that isn't clunky, and we definitely don't want players to be getting hit with shots while they're just trying to open a door. So what's the solution? Well, the solution to this problem is height. You see, mobs are intentionally programmed such that by wandering, they don't passively make the decision to take fall damage. You see, if I put a creeper on this post right here that is 4 blocks high, it's impossible to get down from this post without taking at least half a heart of fall damage. So, they'll never actually leave the post. I can warp the game for as long as I want, they'll shuffle between these 4 squares or 1 square, but they'll never consciously make the decision to jump off. However, when there's a player nearby, their attitude changes. They're more than willing to endanger themselves if means reaching the player. The threshold in which mobs are willing to endanger themselves actually increases with difficulty and actually gets really high when you scale up to difficulties like hard, which is why you'll see a lot of hardcore runs get ended by base jumping creepers in dark ravines. So if we now go back to the first design, we can actually see this mechanic being employed. This first creeper, I guess our sighting creeper, when it sees any player in this field, it will make the conscious choice to navigate off of this pillar. Since there's an end rod in front here, and it detects that as being solid, it will choose to go this way to fall off of the pillar and navigate towards the player. It actually doesn't care about candles for some reason. Candles are not seen as obstructions. What that's going to do is it's going to push this creeper into this tripwire hook, which is going to cause an activation. These chest minecarts are simply to nudge the creepers back into place so they don't stay on the tripwire hook. And if we look at that, this is exactly what's going to happen. Before we get into the other designs, I want to get out of the way that there is actually a small caveat, and that this creeper actually here in the front has one option to move, and it's to the center of this block. And the reason why it isn't already on the center of the block is because the more I jut it outside of the face of this surface, the bigger viewing range it has. If it was embedded in the side, it might only have a 60-degree viewing angle, but here, since it's sticking fully out, it has a 180-degree semicircle of viewing range. This actually means that very occasionally the creeper will choose to move to the center of the block, which will cause one activation, very rarely. I don't know if we'll even see it now. Yeah, I didn't think so. But it's still a possibility, so you might get a false positive every like 20 minutes or so. But for the cause of making automatic doors, it's very okay that very rarely it'll automatically open for a player that just isn't there. Alright. So the rest of the designs that we're going to see are going to be ones that I designed for the sole purpose of attempting to make the previous one cheaper, but not have too many other problems. And generally, you have to sacrifice some in order to remove, I guess, maybe one extra chest minecart or one extra creeper. So for this next one, in order to add a single chest minecart in this position, I actually had to lower this glass pane, and now it's more of an abstraction, which means it only really makes sense for corner viewing angles, like so, but it is slightly faster and definitely just as reliable. This design also tries to cheapen up a bit, but we end up with this weird truncated semicircle detection range because this end rod actually ends up being a huge nuisance due to the fact that we have to raise up the creepers slightly so that they can nudge this chest minecart. The main reason why these designs get so odd is because we have to fit a lot of things into a small space, so we need this back creeper to touch both a nudge mechanism to push it back into place, a barrier block, basically a block that will stop the creeper from falling off, but the creeper kind of thinks can still walk through and pathfind towards the player, as well as a piece of string or pressure plate in order to detect when this actually happens that the creeper tries to move away. This leads to kind of a dance of trading off practicality for better viewing ranges, faster detection times, and stuff like that. There was also a brief period of design where I tried to use ladder mechanics as a function to detect the creeper's movement. You see, originally we were detecting side-to-side movement, aka the creeper nudging something into a tripwire. Here we're trying to detect the creeper pushing something up a ladder. In this case, we have a spider. It's treating every block as a ladder, and we can already start to see the problem. For some reason, they just like to get stuck and stay up, and this causes unending false positives. This is also exhibited in the single creeper design. As you can see, it simply just doesn't want to move back down. Lastly, we have this design, which I'm not going to really talk a whole lot about. The only special thing about it is that it uses water as the nudging mechanism instead of another entity. Now, what if short-range player detectors that are used to open doors aren't really your thing? What if you want to know immediately if a player is approaching your base from a really long distance away? This is sort of a slightly better security system. You see, if I step within this range and go into survival mode, this detector will immediately see me and this red light will turn on. Now, how does this work? See, this actually functions based on the aggressive behavior mechanic I discussed earlier. The thing about blazes is that when they see you, they actually get ready to shoot you and literally fire up to get ready to do that. They light on fire, and this actually can be detected if we simply keep them inside of a cauldron of water. Because what's going to happen is they're going to light on fire, and the cauldron will attempt to put out that fire, and that we can actually detect. We can actually see this in action if I go into free cam mode, fly over, and then go into survival mode. As you can see, it lights on fire, immediately depriving this cauldron of water, which causes this trapdoor to slam in its face. This immediately intersects with the point in which the blaze sees you, causing them to be unable to line up the shot, and that means that they won't light you on fire. This is important for making sure that this is a player detection system and not a turret defense system, which is not what we want. Now, as with all my designs, this one also has a caveat. The problem with this one is that it actually takes a little bit to reset itself, since we have to wait for water to drip into the cauldrons. The thing about Java Minecraft is that for some reason there's no way to put water into a cauldron without just letting dripstones drip into it, so that's the unfortunate thing we have to wait for. But this is actually pretty okay, because for an early warning system, we care about when the player is detected, not when it is stopped being detected. So this is honestly an okay thing that it has a pretty long cooldown. In case you couldn't have guessed already, this is the reason we have 2 cauldrons, to increase the probability that one of them ends up filling up with at least 1 level of water by the time we need to use the system again. The last thing we've got on the list is this shulker detection system. I guess it's slightly useful, but it's not really practical because of how expensive shulkers are to obtain, but it does definitely work. This system just has lava to eat up the bullets most of the time. They try to pathfind outwards and they get vaporized by the lava. This is to prevent you from getting once again shot by an unnecessary turret defense system. And the reason this works is because the shulker will only open to full height when it sees a player, and therefore only fully trigger this string when it sees a player. Oh, by the way, right before the outro, if you've seen a lot more of my videos, you might notice that there's a little bit different weather today. I changed the weather to have slightly more of an overcast feel, which isn't as bright as day, but isn't as dark as night. If you like it more, make sure to comment, or you can tell me that you actually like night much more, and that you want me to keep doing it like that. Anyways, that'll be it for today's video. I guess I more so just wanted to introduce the idea of optical switches, I guess that's what I'm going to call them. There's definitely a lot more room for improvement to remove some of the tiny little problems with all of these designs, and I absolutely encourage that people experiment to make a design that fixes all of these, hopefully. But that'll be it for today. If you like the kind of content, make sure to check out my other stuff, like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.